Chapter 92. The man looked straight at her complaining face and chuckled. The dinner has been reheated twice. Does Imperial Concubine want me to let them reheat it 3 more times? Your Majesty, can you turn your back to me when I change my clothes? Hearing this, Feng Juqing couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Why? There were thousands of reasons in Shan Yueji's mind. All of them were, men and women should not touch each other, men and women should be different, men and women should be alone. But when it came to the point of saying it, the man in front of her was the emperor, and she was his imperial concubine in name, his woman. If she said these words out, Feng Juqing might really be angry. It was okay to use Guiyuan to block it once, but if she blocked it too many times, she would be playing hard to get in the man's eyes. Shan Yueji grinned at the man. I'm shy. As she spoke, she really made a shy expression in front of the man. It could be seen that the man's handsome eyebrows moved. His beautiful eyebrows were raised, and a pair of deep black eyes fell on her little face that was pretending to be shy. He laughed. I just asked Imperial Concubine to take off your coat. Shan Yueji, seeing that she stood in the same place for a long time, her little face seemed to be fixed by someone. The stiff smile was still stuck on her little face. Feng Juqing stepped forward and picked up a coat from the soft bed that she took off when she went out today. His big hand fell on her shoulder, easily took off her outer skirt, and put a pink outer skirt on her body. The whole movement was smooth and elegant. There was only one sentence in Shan Yueji's mind now. Has it begun? No, it's over. The man was very close to her. His white and handsome face was like a young man coming out of a painting, clean and clear, and his white clothes were like snow. Incomparably handsome. After putting on the coat for her, the man's big hand didn't leave directly, but fell on her thin shoulder and slightly tightened. Shan Yueji suddenly looked up. He was still as gentle as water. In addition to the gentleness in his dark eyes, there seemed to be another complex and dangerous emotion. Your Majesty? The Imperial Consort's own scent smells better. Feng Juqing's eyes drooped, and his elegant crimson lips curled up into a smile. If I carry an unfamiliar aura, I will feel uncomfortable. Shan Yueji's delicate little face was slightly pale. She chuckled and said, I also think that next time I meet the regent, I will walk around him and not argue with him again. The man held her hand and walked out of the inner hall. The Prince Regent is indifferent and unreasonable. You won't be able to gain anything from arguing with him. Diaoyang Palace, it's best if you don't go there in the future. Shan Yueji wanted to pull her hand back, but the man held it tightly. With every word, the man's grip tightened, especially when he mentioned Imo Wushang and Diaoyang Palace. I was bored in the palace today, so I randomly walked around. I don't know how I ended up in Diaoyang Palace. Don't worry, Your Majesty, Diaoyang Palace is filled with yin qi. If it weren't for double happiness following behind me to give me courage, I would have been scared to death. In the future, I will definitely not go to Diaoyang Palace. Sitting on the round chair, the young emperor personally picked a dish for her. Shan Yueji stuffed this dish into her mouth, but it was tasteless. She had never underestimated Feng Juqing's intelligence and meticulousness. Chapter 93. When he said that there was a strange smell on her body, she knew that he must have noticed that she was with Imo Wushang tonight. He seemed to be calm and casual. Even though he had been smiling since she came back, such a man was dangerous. He was more dangerous than an enemy who wanted to get rid of you and kill you. Is the food not to your taste? Jin specially asked General Shun about these meals and made them according to Gu Weifei's preferences. Shan Yueji put down the bowl and chopsticks. As she moved, the man's eyes also looked at her. There is a smell of powder on your Majesty's body. Her words made Feng Juqing stunned, and then he thought of something. He raised his lips and said, Is Imperial Concubine using my words to stop me? This concubine has seen Big Sister Empress a few times. This concubine can still distinguish the scent of Big Sister Empress's perfume. In addition to the smell of powder on Empress Sister, I also smell a strange smell on your Majesty's body. The man took a sip of tea and waited for her to continue. Shan Yueji glared at him. The emperor has been busy these days. How could he have the time to go to the concubine's palace? His days are even worse than a monk's. The sudden fragrance must have come from a little sister trying to attract the emperor's attention when the emperor was in the imperial garden and purposely bumped into you. Feng Juqing put down the teacup and raised his eyebrows slightly. Although I'm different from His Majesty, the people I meet are all the same. I didn't expect to meet the regent. I'm arrogant and can't stand being bullied at home, especially by Mo Wushang, who has always been disrespectful to me. In a moment of anger, I wanted to go up and ridicule him. It's reasonable. Your Majesty, you can't wrong me. Heaven and earth can prove my love for you. If I really have such feelings for the regent, I won't come to the palace. Shun Yueji's eyes turned red, and there was a posture of tears. Feng Juqing glanced at her and said, Imperial concubine, you just need to explain. Since you can't squeeze out these tears, there is no need to force it. Your Majesty, if you don't give this concubine any face, it will make this concubine feel ashamed. The emperor lowered his head and smiled. He picked up a dish and put it in her bowl. Eat quickly, otherwise, the food will be cold again. How's Big Sis Empress' face? The man's eyes dimmed slightly. General Shun had already sent the Yulu ointment into the palace. Now he should have applied the Yulu ointment and rest. Hearing this, Shin Yueji was slightly surprised. Your Majesty, you didn't go to Xianghe Palace today? Feng Juqing gracefully ate a mouthful of rice, his voice gentle. I am busy with the affairs of the imperial court, so I came to Imperial Consort's place after finishing my official duties. She paused for a moment and heard the man's last words. Who would have thought that the Imperial Consort would not be in her chambers, making us wait here for a long time? Shin Yueji laughed. I forgot the time while enjoying the beautiful scenery. Feng Juqing glanced at her with a smile. Not only does Imperial Consort look down on me, but it seems like Imperial Consort is also ignoring what I said to Imperial Consort. This concubine felt wronged, so I went out to relax and calm down. When I came back, I was still smiling cheekily at Your Majesty. Your Majesty, this concubine thinks that I have done enough. You know this concubine's character, to be able to tolerate to this extent for Your Majesty. Shin Yueji's voice was stuck. Chapter 94. She felt the warmth from the man's palm. Shin Yueji raised her head to look at him. There were really tears in her crystal eyes. Feng Juqing patted her little hand and comforted her gently. Jin knows that Guifei has been wronged because of today's matter. If it wasn't for the fact that I was prepared, that Xiaozhuozi and Shuangxi had a private friendship, and I didn't know what happened, I would be charged with the crime of murdering the Empress because of jealousy. Is Your Majesty going to execute me to avenge the Empress? Feng Juqing was stunned to hear her angry and sorrowful tone. After a long time, he reached out his gentle hand to her gloomy little face. His big palm gently stroked her smooth little face. There is no need to execute me, but I am afraid that Guifei will have to suffer the flogging. Shin Yueji was instantly annoyed when she heard this. She didn't know where her courage came from, but she slapped his hand away. Pa! The sound scared Gao Dazhong, who was waiting at the side. He knelt on the ground with a plop. Your Majesty. Her beautiful little face was full of displeasure. I have told Your Majesty before that as the daughter of the Shun family, what I despise the most is to use those despicable means to murder concubines and deceive Your Majesty. Feng Juqing was not angry at all, looking at her angry little face. The more angry she was, the softer the expression on his face was. He looked at her gently. Je naturally believe you. His words were as gentle as the wind. Shin Yueji wanted to find fault with him, but the words stuck in her throat. Feng Juqing stood up and put his big hands behind his back. Take away these dishes? Yes, Your Majesty. Gao Dazhong wiped the sweat on his forehead. He got up from the ground and quickly ordered people to come in and take away all the untouched dishes on the table. Before leaving, he didn't forget to look at Shun Yueji with a worried face. The meaning was self-evident. Even if this concubine is willing to believe in Your Majesty's words, and Your Majesty believes in this concubine, but today, Your Majesty's anger towards this concubine is also real. Your Majesty loves the people as if they were his own children, and has always been warm and approachable to others. His Majesty's appearance today truly frightened this concubine. When this concubine entered the hall, this concubine didn't even dare to salute, and only wanted to tell the cause and effect of the matter first to prove this concubine's innocence. This concubine was afraid that if I spoke too late, then His Majesty wouldn't give this concubine a chance to speak, blindly condemning this concubine's crime. Your Majesty, Shun Yueji clenched her fists and walked behind him, being framed for no reason and not giving people a chance to explain themselves. This feeling is really not good. The large hand under the long robe couldn't help but tremble slightly when it heard her words. At that moment, he forgot how to stretch his slender fingers. The man's handsome face turned pale, and his dark eyes seemed to be covered by something. When had there ever been such a person, with a pale, helpless face covered in tears, loudly questioned him? You don't believe me. You don't believe me. You said that you would always believe me. Feng Juqing closed his eyes gently, and his trembling fingertips slowly returned to normal. There was a burst of pain in his heart. This kind of pain accompanied him every day, like being pricked by needles, like being stabbed by swords, and like being torn by someone at random. The man didn't respond for a long time, which made Shin Yueji feel strange and turned to him. Chapter 95. She was surprised and waved her hand in front of his face. Your Majesty, what's wrong with you? The next moment, her hand was grabbed by the man. She fell into the man's arms. The man hugged her so tightly that he wanted to rub her into his body. Is it my fault? He never wanted to kill her. Never. He believed her and never doubted her. He just, Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Shin Yueji struggled in his arms. Your Majesty, what are you talking about? It's me. The woman's restlessness in his arms made Feng Juqing gradually come back to his senses. A smile appeared on his pale face. He reached out and smoothed her messy hair. If there is a next time, I will listen to your explanation, okay? Shin Yueji heard his words. Your Majesty, you still think there will be a next time? Other men say comforting words and promise that there will never be a next time. But you can't wait for this kind of thing to happen again. You don't want me to live a long life. Feng Juqing smiled weakly. In this harem, I can't promise you. If it were someone else, he might not have said it so directly. But it made sense. The harem was a big dye vat. No matter how clean and kind a person was, who could guarantee that they would be the same in this harem? Go to sleep. It's getting late. The man's words made Shun Yueji's little face startled. She asked in a surprised voice, Your Majesty, are you really going to stay here tonight? Feng Juqing's beautiful eyebrows raised slightly. At this time, do you still want to drive me away? Shin Yueji blushed and squirmed. Your Majesty, I'm not ready yet. Shin Yueji was shocked. She covered her head and stared at him pitifully. Your Majesty, why did you hit me? The young emperor shook his head helplessly. What is imperial concubine thinking about? Your Majesty is the emperor and I am the concubine. If you stay here in the middle of the night, what do you want me to think? She couldn't help muttering. Seeing that the man was about to raise his hand again, she hurriedly lifted her skirt and ran into the hall. She kicked off her shoes and climbed into bed. The man followed her in. Shin Yueji didn't remember it very clearly, but she did have a child in her stomach. Shin Yueji didn't remember it very clearly. The familiar memory was that he was used to hugging her to sleep together. The two of them slept together, and he never did anything that crossed the line. This was the first time Shin Yueji had said that he would stay here for the night. Although she believed that the man did not like her and would not do anything out of line with her, as long as she thought about sleeping with this man on the same pillow again, she would. She couldn't help but hold the brocade quilt tightly. She was afraid that she would do something to him at night. Fortunately, she had a vigilant look on her face and was glaring like a tiger at its prey. As for Feng Juqing, he ordered Gao Dazhong to move all the memorials to the table in the inner hall. The candlelight was lit. For her sake, the man specially asked Gao Dazhong to cover the candlelight so that the light would not be too dazzling and make her unable to sleep. The dim candlelight could only illuminate a corner of the table. The man casually picked up a memorial, his movements elegant and his expression serious. His handsome facial features were natural and unparalleled. After staring at the man for a while, Feng Juqing seemed to have noticed something. His pale face had already returned to normal. Chapter 96. Shen Yueji came back to her senses at the nonchalant mention of Gue Fei. She unconsciously opened her mouth. When His Majesty stayed over at the younger sister's palace, did he always read memorials like this until dawn? The man said with a smile, "What is imperial concubine hinting to me?" "No, nothing." Shun Yueji put down the curtain, completely blocking the gentle sight of the man outside. "Your Majesty has to deal with official business in the day. It's better to rest more at night. If it goes on like this, I'm afraid that your body will not be able to bear it." It was night. After Shin Yueji said this to the man, she didn't get a response from the man. She was lying on the bed alone. She was on guard at the beginning, but sleepiness hit her at the end. Her eyelids kept moving up and down, and she finally fell into a deep sleep. The sound of a woman's rhythmic breathing could be heard clearly from the curtain. Feng Juqing looked away from the memorials in his hand and fell on the hazy curtain. Thousands of things flashed through his dark eyes in an instant, fast and accurate. He looked at the petite figure in the curtain for a while, and his eyes flickered slightly. He fell on the memorials again. "Your Majesty, bad news. Your Majesty, bad news." Something big happened. She didn't know how long she had slept, but there was a sudden noise in her ears. Probably because the emperor considered that she was asleep, the sound gradually quieted down, but it still woke Shin Yueji up. She opened her eyes in confusion, stretched out her little hand to the curtain, and revealed a small head. The night was still dark. Obviously, she hadn't slept for a long time. "Your Majesty, what happened?" Shun Yueji didn't take off her clothes. She tidied up the wrinkles, got down from the bed, and walked to Feng Juqing. The little eunuch kneeling on the ground shivered, and his young face was extremely pale. His voice was thick with trembling, and the corners of his eyes were moist. He didn't dare to speak. Feng Juqing took a cloak and put it on her. He held her hand and sat down on the round chair. He looked faintly at the servant who broke into the inner hall. It was full of majesty. Gao Dezhong saw such a scene when he came in. He was so frightened that he immediately knelt on the ground. "Your Majesty, it's this servant's negligence." This servant didn't expect this little eunuch to be so daring as to trespass into Phoenix Perch Palace. "This servant will drag him away right now. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Your Majesty, please spare my life." This servant is little Shi of Daoyang Palace. Something big happened in Daoyang Palace, so this servant didn't dare to stop and rushed all the way here. This servant didn't see the eunuch who was on night watch outside the palace. So I barged in, please." "What did you say?" The 3 words Daoyang Palace caused the displeasure on Feng Juqing's face to dissipate. He wasn't in the mood to listen to the rest of the conversation and directly asked, "What happened to Daoyang Palace?" Xiaoxi forcefully swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said, "Corpses. The corpses of those palace maids who had disappeared previously all appeared in Daoyang Palace. They bit anyone they saw, and even sucked their blood." Feng Juqing's elegant face was like a gust of cold wind as he narrowed his eyes at him. "Since when did a palace maid go missing in Daoyang Palace? Why didn't you report this to me?" Xiaoxi was so frightened that his body was trembling. He kept bowing his head in anxiety. It was uniquely said that Your Majesty is busy with official matters, so there's no need to alarm Your Majesty about the disappearance of the palace maids in Daoyang Palace. It's just a small matter. Perhaps they offended one of the concubines and were punished. Bang! A dull sound came from the table. Chapter 97. He didn't care about Daoyang Palace's affairs on the surface, but now that he heard the 3 words Daoyang Palace, his behavior was too abnormal. Those who didn't know better would think that he was hiding some treasure inside. Was he really that afraid that something would happen to Daoyang Palace? As for those missing palace maids, they reappeared in Daoyang Palace and bit anyone they saw. Shun Yueji's mouth twitched. She had seen these palace maids before. Weren't they locked in a secret room in the back hall of Daoyang Palace by a Mo Wushang? What was this guy doing? Seeing the emperor's displeased expression, Gao Dazhong got up from the ground and kicked little Shi. "How dare you? Daoyang Palace is in trouble, but you didn't report it to His Majesty truthfully and covered it up. Now that such a thing has happened, I think even 100 heads won't be enough for you. Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Gao Dezhong, your servant is here. Set out for Daoyang Palace. Yes, your majesty. Seeing the emperor leave, Shin Yueji quickly got up from the round chair. The man stopped and didn't look back. Shin Yueji walked to him, her crystal-clear eyes filled with deep worry. Just now, little she said that those missing palace maids suddenly reappeared and bit anyone they saw. Your majesty, be careful. When you go, don't forget to bring more guards with you. Feng Juqing looked at her deeply and finally chuckled. Imperial consort, have a good rest. Double she covered her mouth and yawned as she came in from outside. She saw Shin Yueji tidying up her clothes and was about to go out. Your Highness, you called me here in the middle of the night. What are you going to do? Shin Yueji didn't care about her and tidied up her clothes. She then heard her say lightly, the palace maids that the regent locked in the secret room have come out. Knowing that she didn't understand, Shin Yueji looked at her. They are now killing in Daoyang Palace. What? Double she held her chin. Your Highness, aren't they well guarded in the cage? And if someone didn't deliberately let them out, they wouldn't be able to get out. Moreover, the guard is the regent's trusted guard, Ji Chu. How did they get out? Shin Yueji's face turned black. Of course it was Imo Wushang who deliberately released it. Otherwise, how did they get out? Double Happiness was speechless. Why? When it came to the affairs between a man and a woman, Double Happiness's mind spun faster than Shin Yueji's. Soon, she thought of an unlikely possibility and the only plausible reason. Your Highness, do you remember that when we left, you told the Prince Regent that His Majesty would come to your Phoenix Perch Palace? In the end, the Prince Regent's tone didn't seem very good. Shin Yueji, could it be that the Prince Regent is deliberately guarding against you and the Emperor? He knew that His Majesty was staying at her ladyship's place, so he intentionally released those palace maids and had them kill people in Daoyang Palace. In this way, once His Majesty finds out, he will definitely personally head over to take charge of the situation. Shin Yueji, apart from this reason, they really couldn't think of how these palace maids were released. Because Imo Wushang was simply too strong, with him suppressing them, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens for those palace maids to come out. The only possibility is Double Happiness's guess. Chapter 98. A few palace maids are killing people in Daoyang Palace. They look like ghosts, and some of them don't even have legs. Daoyang Palace is filled with ghostly wails and howls all night long. This makes people suspect that it's the ghost of the late Empress. Hearing this, Shuangshi nodded and then said, but the late Empress is dead. The regent can't live with a dead person. Also, Your Highness, haven't you noticed that the regent has changed a lot? Not only does he listen to you, but he also takes advantage of you occasionally. Not getting a response, Shuangshi looked at Shin Yueji, who was quickly dressing up and couldn't help but speak again. Your Highness, are you planning to go to Daoyang Palace? Shin Yueji said faintly, yes, let's go and see. Late at night, the cold wind howled, accompanied by countless torches in the dark night. The pungent smell of blood seeped into the heart and nose, accompanied by the sound of vomiting. The three palace maids were like corpses, biting anyone they saw. In the time that Feng Juqing arrived, more than a dozen eunuchs and palace maids in Daoyang Palace had died in their mouths. Your Majesty! Li Huixing didn't expect things to develop to this point. When he saw Feng Juqing's dragon carriage coming, his fat face trembled as he rushed to the front of the Emperor's dragon carriage. Your Majesty! Daoyang Palace! Daoyang Palace is haunted. I don't know what happened to these missing palace maids. They bite anyone they see. The Emperor's cold eyes fell on him, and he raised his hand slightly. Then, dozens of black-clothed secret guards rushed out from behind him, and in a short time, they subdued the three palace maids who kept biting people. Swoosh, 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 between the flashes of swords. The sound of a head rolling on the ground was especially clear in this dark night. Ugh, someone in the crowd retched. Following this retching sound, even more sounds of vomiting could be heard in the cold and gloomy night. The head of the palace maid who had been beheaded was separated from her neck, and a large number of black worms crawled out. Apart from the black worms, there was nothing else in the palace maid's body. It was empty, pitch black. Countless black worms wriggled out of their bodies, and their originally inflated bodies, which were no different from ordinary people, quickly turned into a layer of dry skin at a speed visible to the naked eye. A gust of cold wind blew. Not even his bones were left. Even his skin and tattered clothes had been blown away by the wind. The black worm crawled on the ground, but it couldn't find its destination. It slowly merged with the ground and turned into a puddle of black water. It sank into the ground and disappeared. The cold night was quiet. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them. If they hadn't seen it with their own two eyes, and if the Martin Sun Palace didn't still have the mess from before, they would have almost suspected that the scene from before was an illusion. A palace maid who had been missing for a long time and was still able to crawl without legs. Even with its head chopped off, its body was still squirming on the ground, drinking human blood and eating human flesh. A black bug that had left its body and disappeared on the ground. When did these palace maids disappear? Feng Juqing's indifferent voice became calm again. Li Huixing had long been scared out of his wits by the scene in front of him. His lips trembled as if he could not hear the emperor's question. Gao Dazhong fiercely kicked him. The emperor is asking you a question. Are you mute? Chapter 99. Feng Juqing placed his hand on the armrest and clenched his slender and fair fingers. His dark eyes stared in the direction of Daoyang Palace. Thick flames flickered. I have said that if anything happens in Daoyang Palace, you are to inform me first. Li Huixing, as an old man in the palace, are you ignoring my words? Li Huixing's heart was in his throat, and his palms and the backs of his hands were covered in sweat. His legs turned to jelly, and he cowered in fear. I had informed your majesty when the first palace maid went missing. At that time, it was Lady Yuxiu who served the empress who rejected me, saying that your majesty is busy with official business every day and shouldn't disturb your majesty with such a small matter. She also reprimanded me severely. So bang! The emperor slammed the armrest of the dragon carriage. Everyone was scared out of their wits. They knelt down and didn't even dare to breathe. In the depths of his dark and seeping eyes, a gloomy flame was like the breaking of dawn as it cried out. Feng Juqing's beautiful lips curled into a faint smile. He looked at Li Huixing. In eunuch Li's eyes, my words are not even comparable to a maid? I don't dare. Take him away and beat him to death. Your Majesty, please have mercy. Your Majesty, please have mercy. Li Huixing felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. His body was completely cold. His eyes were wide open and filled with fear. His 10 fingers gripped the soil hard, and his head knocked on the ground, making a dong 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 sound. Your Majesty, please have mercy. Just look at me. Your Majesty. 2 men in black came forward and pulled him away. How could Li Huixing's desperate struggle resist the well-trained embroidered uniform guards? His cries for mercy gradually faded away, and his mournful cries were exceptionally terrifying in the cold night. The palace maids and eunuchs who were kneeling were trembling as if they were walking on thin ice. Qiuyang, Your Majesty, go and investigate.
Yes.
Suddenly, a scream pierced the sky. The emperor's hand that was holding the armrest of the dragon carriage tightened. The next moment, Shen Yueji and Double Happiness were pulled out from the bushes. Seeing Shen Yueji, the emperor's pitch-black eyes flashed with some surprise. He reached out to her and said, "Come here." Shen Yueji obediently walked in front of him and placed her small hand on his big one. He pulled her up the dragon carriage, and she obediently sat beside him. Feng Juqing removed his cloak and draped it over her. "Didn't I tell you to rest in the perching phoenix palace? Why are you here?" Shen Yueji still had a lingering fear in her heart. Her beautiful face was filled with panic after the shock. "This concubine is worried about your Majesty, so I came to take a look." She lowered her head in annoyance, like a child who had done something wrong. "I've made the emperor worry." Feng Juqing patted the back of her hand and comforted her. "What did you see just now?" I saw. Shen Yueji's face paled when she heard him ask about what happened just now. Her bright eyes flashed with the panic that came after the fright. Seeing her like this, Feng Juqing tightened his grip on the back of her hand. Speak. A white shadow flashed by. It had an ugly face and was full of nails, and it smiled at this concubine. Chapter 100. She was dressed in white, and her face was full of nails, bruises, and blood. She was ugly. Gao Dazhong's face instantly turned ashen as he listened to this intermittent description. Wasn't this what the late empress looked like after she died? When he turned to look at the emperor again, his handsome face was trembling. Even the big hand that wrapped Xin Yueji in his palm was shaking violently. His body felt as if cold water had been poured over him. Late empress? Xin Yueji suddenly came to her senses. Gao Dazhong's words made her recall the white shadow she had seen just now. I saw it when the late empress sank into the lake. She was dressed in white in her face, and the white shadow I saw just now, suddenly, she couldn't go on. The strength of the man's palm was so strong that he wanted to crush her hand. Xin Yueji was in pain and tears were flashing in her eyes. She tried her best to refute. No, I might have seen wrongly. The white shadow flashed by. The night was so dark and such a big thing happened here. I in double happiness might have been afraid and made a mistake. The late empress is already dead. How could she appear here again? She tried her best to defend herself. It was not difficult for anyone to hear the trembling in her voice. It was the panic after the fear. No matter how hard she tried to explain, she couldn't hide it. Is the ghost of the late empress haunting us? At this time, one of the maids and eunuchs who were kneeling on the ground murmured. In an instant, the emperor's cold eyes were as sharp as ice blades. The little maid was trembling in fear. Sure enough, in the next moment, she was pulled down by someone. The long sword was unsheathed and a cold light flashed. Her head rolled a few times on the ground, and the pungent smell of blood filled the quiet night air again. The atmosphere was extremely cold. Everyone felt uneasy and their hearts were frozen. No one dared to keep their thoughts to themselves and talk nonsense. No one is allowed to mention what happened tonight. Perhaps Xin Yueji's struggle was too obvious. Feng Juqing loosened his grip on her hand. Xin Yueji took the opportunity to pull her hand back from the man's palm. She saw that one of her hands was scratched by him. The bruises from before had split open, and there was a faint trace of blood flowing out. Your Majesty, the bodies of these palace maids and eunuchs, more than 10 eunuchs and palace maids of Diaoyang Palace had been bitten to death before they had even arrived. Tonight's incident had happened at night. If it had been during the day, everyone in the palace would have been alarmed. At that time, coupled with Xin Yueji's words, the people in the palace would probably think that it was the ghost of the late empress who was causing trouble. Feng Juqing, on the other hand, was trying his best to suppress this matter. Those palace maids who disappeared before seemed to have been dead for some time. Now that they suddenly came back to life, there must be a reason for this. There must be something controlling them. Meeting the man's gaze, Xin Yueji carefully said, "Just now, I in double happiness hid behind and saw clearly that there were worms crawling out of their bodies. These dead palace maids and eunuchs had their blood sucked dry. Their faces were frightening and did not look like ordinary corpses. Your Majesty, do you think they will end up like those missing palace maids?" It turned into a corpse and came out to bite people. She did not say the rest of her words clearly. Everyone present, especially the palace maids and eunuchs who had experienced tonight's incident, could understand the meaning behind her words. So many people died in Diaoyang Palace at once, and the way they died was horrifying. Chapter 101. Gao Dazhong. Yes, Your Majesty. Set fire to these corpses. Yes, Your Majesty. Your Majesty burned all the corpses of the palace maids and eunuchs without leaving a single one. Maybe the clues are on them. Sitting on the dragon carriage, Diaoyang Palace was getting further and further away from them. The thick smell of blood in their nostrils also dissipated. Xin Yueji carefully looked up at the emperor who had been silent all the way. Does Imperial Consort also feel that this matter is strange? I've never believed in ghosts and gods. Just now, the white shadow that flashed by really frightened me. However, after I calmed down, I guessed that someone was playing tricks in the dark, deliberately making a commotion. letting your majesty and me think that it was the ghost of the late empress? Your majesty and I may think so, but if the palace maids really heard about it, I'm afraid they will really suspect it. It has nothing to do with her. She didn't understand who he was referring to for a long time. Until the man looked at her, Shen Yueji clearly caught a flash of pain in his eyes. So the she he was talking about, it was her. I know your majesty's intention. If those palace maids' corpses are left, I don't know what they will become in the future. At that time, even if your majesty wants to hide what happened in Daoyang Palace today, I'm afraid you won't be able to. But your majesty personally destroyed the clues, so it will be difficult to find out who is behind this. If the person behind this is not beneficial to your majesty, I'm worried that your majesty— Feng Juqing smiled slightly. There are countless people in this world who want me dead. Imperial consort, you don't have to worry. The dragon carriage stopped outside the Phoenix Palace. The emperor watched her get off the dragon carriage, but he had no intention of getting off. Shen Yueji hesitated for a moment, untied the cloak on her body, and returned it to him. Your majesty, the wind is cold and dew is heavy at night. If you have other things to do, you should put on this cloak first, so that you won't catch a cold. Feng Juqing reached out to take the cloak she handed over, and his eyes fell on her red and swollen hands. I lost control and hurt Imperial Consort's hands. It's fine. Shen Yueji grinned and put her hands behind her back without batting an eyelid. Emperor only needs to remember the promise you made to Chenxia. In the future, if you come visit Chenxia more often, that would be the best compensation for Chenxia. Feng Juqing chuckled and gestured for them to leave. Nyang. This servant felt that His Majesty's smile just now wasn't right. After the Emperor Dragon carriage was far away, Shuangshi came up behind her and whispered. Her heart was in a mess, but she could still smile calmly. It was not easy for Shen Yueji to smile sarcastically. She stretched her body and walked towards the main hall. Yuxiu's corpse has not been found yet. It may be hidden in a corner. Wait until tomorrow. Even if His Majesty wants to cover up the matter of Daoyang Palace, I'm afraid that he won't have the strength to do so. Double Happiness was shocked when he heard that. He almost forgot about Yuxiu. That's right, Your Highness. Why didn't this servant see Yuxiu's corpse? Yuxiu's body was lying there. Prince Regent. In the main hall, a man dressed in a loose black robe was half leaning on the imperial consort's chair. His phoenix eyes were calm and handsome, his face was cold and pale, and his body was tall and thin. In the middle of the night, he appeared in her phoenix palace without anyone noticing and swaggered like this. Chapter 102. Shen Yueji wasn't the only one who had something to say to Imo Wushang. Even Shuangshi was excited to see Imo Wushang. Prince Regent, I have something to ask you. Did you deliberately release the palace maids' corpses that suddenly appeared in Daoyang Palace because you knew that His Majesty was going to stay at Her Highness' place tonight? She was too excited and too straightforward. Facing Double Happiness's straightforward words, Shen Yueji glared fiercely. The man raised his eyebrows indifferently. His fair and slender fingers gently tapped on the table. His sword-like eyebrows were drawn down and his soft black eyes were gloomy. After a long time, yes, he didn't deny it and directly admitted it. Shen Yueji, was it really like this? For a moment, she had mixed feelings. This Imo Wushang suddenly changed too quickly. From the beginning, he couldn't wait to kill her. But now, he was actually learning from those men who had their first awakening of love and was jealous of her. In her heart, she would not simply think that he had fallen in love with her. He must have some ulterior motives. Shuangshi's small face was full of smiles. He bowed respectfully and considerately retreated. Shen Yueji stood in the same place for a while. The man was sitting on his side, while she was standing on her feet. Imo Wushang raised his eyebrows when he saw that she didn't move for a long time. He got up and walked to the round chair at the side and sat down, freeing up the chaise longue for her. Shen Yueji, sitting on the chaise longue, Shen Yueji looked at the man's handsome and silent face. Prince Regent, why did you come to my Phoenix Palace in the middle of the night? Imo Wushang's dark eyes twitched. After hearing her words, his sharp lips twitched slightly. I'm tired. If Prince Regent feels tired, you can stay at Daoyang Palace. Didn't you like to stay at Diaoyang Palace in the past? Shun Yueji smiled slightly. Why do you have to come to my Phoenix Palace? It won't be good if people see it. I'm tired. Shun Yueji's mouth twitched. She glared at him. There's only one bed in Phoenix Palace. What should I do if Prince Regent sleeps with me? If His Majesty suddenly returns and is seen by His Majesty, I won't be able to explain it even if I have 100 mouths. I'm tired. She gritted her teeth and reluctantly accepted his kindness on account of his help today. Shin Yueji held back. Fortunately, I just woke up. If the regent is tired, go and lie down for a while. Seeing that he really got up and walked towards the inner hall, Shun Yueji also quickly stood up. Regent. Hearing her call him, Imo Wushang's footsteps paused. He turned back to look at her, his black eyes filled with doubt. His ignorant appearance was like that of an innocent child, adorable and adorable. To hell with it, Shun Yueji was actually seduced by his amiable and adorable appearance. Her hand secretly pinched her thigh and recovered from the pain. Bin Gong does not care what the Regent Prince is planning and only hope that the Regent Prince can remember that I have no enmity with you, and the Shin family also have no grudges with you. Do not hurt the Shin family. They are good to you, so I won't hurt them. Shun Yueji's heart trembled. She turned her back and said, with the Regent's guarantee, Bin Gong can rest assured. Imo Wushang put his big hands behind his back and stared at her thin and charming back for a while. Finally, he walked towards her step by step. The sound of his footsteps was very light. It was so light that when he walked in front of Shun Yueji, she didn't notice, until a large, cold hand landed on her shoulder. She suddenly came back to her senses and looked at the handsome face in front of her. Chapter 103. Shin Yueji's little face turned pale with fright as she was held in his arms. Shin Yueji was carried to the bed. Realizing what he was going to do, she struggled to get out of his arms. She did struggle out of Imo Wushang's arms, tidied up her messy clothes and stared at him vigilantly. What are you doing? The man answered matter-of-factly, sleeping with me. Bah! Shin Yueji spat at him fiercely. Shin Yueji almost jumped up in anger at his straightforward words. Who's sleeping with you? Dream on. I'm the Emperor's woman now. Not yours, Regent's. Yes, I am. The man's face was gloomy and his tone was unkind. His cold voice was tinged with a hint of coolness. Without giving her a chance to refuse, Imo Wushang's big hand restrained her waist. Shin Yueji was just about to struggle when she saw his hand on her body a few times. The next moment, Shin Yueji's whole body was stiff like a corpse and couldn't move. She was held in his arms like a corpse, then gently and considerately took off her coat and shoes and gently put her on the bed. Her eyes widened to the size of copper bells. The man then took off his loose robe and got on the bed in a tight-fitting black suit. She raised her head, and his strong arm stretched out along her head. Her head was comfortably pillowed on his arm. The man's hand pulled her, and her whole body suddenly rolled into the man's arms. Imo Wushang held her in his arms, put his smooth chin on her hairy head, and covered her with a brocade quilt. Sleep, sleep, sleep your ass. Shin Yueji's mouth was not sealed, so she could still speak. But she was afraid that if she really scolded, Imo Wushang would feel that she was noisy and seal her mouth as well. The regent came to my Phoenix Perch Palace in the middle of the night just to sleep? To sleep with you. She felt the man's chin move and rub against her head. He found a position that he was satisfied with and leaned closer to her. Only then did he behave. Shin Yueji wanted to cry but had no tears. Prince Regent, don't get so close to me. The Emperor suspected me when he left just now. If Bin Gong's body is stained with your aura, His Majesty will be angry. The large hand on her waist tightened. The man's fingertips rubbed against her waist, tightening and loosening at times. She couldn't look up, so she couldn't see the man's expression. Shin Yueji could only feel that the flames on his body seemed to have become cold again. It was cold and gloomy. Just being hugged by him like this, wrapped in the brocade quilt, that bone-piercing chill came from the outside, directly attacking her body. You are alone. You said it yourself. I was only telling the Prince Regent that I liked him. Besides, you have to be responsible for your own words. Imo Wushang intercepted her. Shen Yueji was speechless. The man was silent for a while. Your body can only be contaminated with my aura. If you don't say anything, I'll take it as a silent agreement. She couldn't wait to curse all 8 generations of his ancestors. Shin Yueji had just opened her mouth to speak a word when her throat couldn't make a sound. She instantly knew that he was up to no good. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only be held in his arms obediently. She also couldn't control his big hand moving around her waist. The man's thin and cold lips were pressed against her earlobe, cool and gentle, tickling her. Chapter 104. His words were as cold as a sharp blade. It was as if the frost that fell from the sky in the dead of winter had frozen into glass. The sharp glass cut a person's neck. With just a slight cut, the person's blood would splatter on the spot. The quilt was warm, but the man's body was cold. The warm quilt was soon infected by him. Fortunately, Mwani came back in the end. Shin Yueji couldn't be bothered with him. She couldn't move and didn't want to waste her energy, so she nestled in his arms and fell asleep. Hearing the rhythmic breathing in his arms, Imo Wushang's black eyes suddenly opened and he moved away from her. His black eyes rolled as he seriously looked at the delicate and beautiful face in front of him. His fingertips gently slid across her delicate face. He had imagined this scene for many years. He longed for the day when the woman he loved the most lay in his arms. His broad chest would be the only place for her. He would use his whole life to protect her and would never allow her to be hurt. Now that the woman he loved was lying in his arms, he didn't dare to miss a glance. He wanted to hold her like this forever, never separate, and sleep like this forever. No one would disturb them. They belonged to each other. In her heart, his big hand slowly moved from her face to her chest. In this beating place, there was him. Her chest was itchy. The strange feeling made Shin Yueji have a wet dream. She didn't sleep well. She opened her hazy eyes and looked at the handsome face in front of her. She was a little surprised when his gaze fell on her chest. Just like that, his hand gently moved around the position of her heart. All his eyes fell on her chest, as if he could see the depths of her heart through the thin layer of clothes. As for Shun Yueji, she widened her eyes and stared at the man. Fuck. Hypocrite. It was because she trusted his character too much that she could fall asleep in his arms. In the end, when she woke up, she saw his dishonest hands and feet. Her angry gaze was too dazzling that Imo Wushang sensed it. His burning gaze moved away from her chest and onto her small face that had turned green from holding back. Sensing the anger on her face, his handsome face was tinged with confusion. Are you awake? Holy shit. If I touch your chest with my hand, see if you can wake up or not. Shin Yueji glared at him fiercely. Imo Wushang did not understand and released her mute acupoint. Shin Yueji said in a hoarse voice, My body is numb. I want to move. Hearing this, Imo Wushang's beautiful index finger tapped on her body. The moment she could move, Shin Yueji pounced on the man like a wolf. The man didn't seem to think that she would suddenly have so much strength and was pounced on by her. Shin Yueji took the opportunity to sit on him. Imo Wushang had originally intended to push her away, but after seeing this ambiguous position, he obediently lay down. His pair of dark eyes were fixated on Shun Yueji's ferocious and angry face. Shin Yueji grabbed the man's collar fiercely and looked into his eyes, which were as dark as pearls and stars in the night sky. You are a sanctimonious hypocrite. You are the same as those men. Not a single man was good. Imo Wushang, don't think that I don't dare to resist because I'm afraid of you. Imo Wushang looked a little embarrassed because of her pulling. His handsome face moved slightly, but he did not speak. Chapter 105. How could Shin Yueji let him go so easily when she finally gained the upper hand? The man's curly eyelashes trembled slightly, and his dark eyes were as dark as ink. Holding you? Holding me? Shin Yueji sneered. What about your hands? Hands? Imo Wushang closed his eyes, thought about it seriously, and then looked up. His ink-colored eyes were bright like stars. Shin Yueji had a fire in her stomach. She stared at his handsome and thin face and gritted her teeth. You don't want to talk? Regent, do you have nothing to say? I'm keeping you here because the Prince Regent has helped me, so I owe the Prince Regent a favor. Mo Wushang's throat tightened. Regent took advantage of me while I was asleep tonight and touched me. If it were someone else, I would have sent someone to drag that person out and behead him. Since the Prince Regent has helped me, I won't argue with you this time. Just take this matter as me returning the favor to the Prince Regent. In the future, Regent, don't disturb me anymore. Hiss. Her waist tightened. The man's tall and straight body pressed her under him. Shin Yueji had no strength to resist, and her eyes were full of lingering fear. The man's eyes were burning, flashing with a faint light. Shin Yueji had goosebumps on her back, and the man's naked eyes made her feel panic. Her stubborn temper made her unwilling to give in. Her strong and calm eyes met the man's eyes. Regent. The man's next move shocked her. His thin lips brushed past her delicate ear. It was soft and had a hint of coolness. She couldn't help but shiver. She even forgot how to say the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Is there any kind of favor that can make me stay with you forever? Swoosh. The man's ambiguous and deep words made Shin Yueji's little face blush uncontrollably like a cooked duck. However, the man said it seriously, and even his handsome face did not show the slightest hint of a joke. Mo Wushang caressed her blushing face. Confusion flashed across his handsome face as he asked again, A warm current gushed out from her nose, as if it was about to rush out. The man's posture was excessively seductive, his handsomeness pressing down on people. No one could compare to his incomparable jade-like face. His pitch-black pearl-like eyes were incomparably resplendent. She had a fair complexion and glowing skin. His glossy black hair was as messy as silk, sticking to his handsome face. It was a devilish yet bewitching beauty, especially his pair of eyes that were capable of captivating one's soul. They were light and without any impurities, clean and resplendent like luminous pearls, and his entire body emitted an enchanting flame that caused others to be unable to shift their eyes away. Her rosy red lips were like a hibiscus emerging from the water, crystal clear. Mo Wushang's beauty, whether it was his aura or his identity, could be said to be unique in this world. Moreover, there was an indescribable attractiveness about him that even Feng Juqing couldn't imitate. Compared to Feng Juqing, he was not inferior at all. It was a pity that her predecessor had devoted herself to Feng Juqing and ignored the man who had been silently protecting her behind her and who had been hurt and insulted by her many times. Initially, she still had some sympathy for him, but then she thought about how he had a change of heart towards his previous self, Gu Yueqin, because of her. Shun Yueji's little face darkened, and she put her hand on the man's chest, trying to push him away. Chapter 106. Shin Yueji couldn't help glaring at him. What are you doing? I'm warning you, you'd better not push your luck, or I'll call someone. Let the people in the palace see how the regent, who was infatuated with the former empress, climbed into my bed in the middle of the night and pestered me. Mo Wushang didn't say anything. He hugged her tightly and repeated his words. Tell me, what kind of favor can make you willingly keep me by your side forever? Shin Yueji struggled without strength. The man kept asking for her affirmation. She collapsed on the bed, her black eyes mixed with anger, looking back at the man's seriousness. It's very simple. Regent, don't force me. The man frowned. I've never forced you. Shin Yueji sneered. Regent, you came to my Phoenix Palace. First, you sealed my acupoints so that I couldn't move and was at your mercy. Second, you sealed my mute acupoints so that I couldn't scold you. Isn't that forcing? I'm afraid you'll be tired. Mo Wushang raised his eyebrows, and his crimson lips moved slightly. His handsome jade face was filled with gentleness. Shin Yueji stared at him for a long time. Regent, are you serious about me? If a person was lying, his expression wouldn't be so serious. He was so serious that you could feel the sincerity from the depths of his eyes just by looking at them. For some reason, Shun Yueji's heart was in a mess. The man's black eyes flickered, falling on her crimson lips, and deepened. She had a bad feeling. Before the man could react, she found a gap and got out of the man's arms. Mo Wushang let her slip out of his arms. Shin Yueji got off the bed barefoot and walked quickly to the table to light the lamp. The half-burned candle was weak. After she changed the new candle, everything in the hall could be seen clearly at this moment. Her little face was still flushed, and it was burning hot. Sitting on the round chair, Shinyueji poured herself a cup of tea to calm down. Only when the warm tea flowed through her body did she recover from the throbbing just now. After she got off the bed, the man changed his posture and leaned on the edge of the bed. His hair was a little messy because of the fight with her just now. The black hair stuck to his handsome face, bringing a seductive charm. His perfect side profile could be compared to everything in this world. He sat there motionless, more colorful than a beautiful painting with verdant hills and clear waters. It was dazzling. The man's sexy lips twitched. Shinyueji didn't know if it was an illusion, but she actually heard the self-deprecating tone in Imo Wushang's voice. When it comes to you, I have always been serious. The regent is being serious now. Could it be that you've forgotten how you wanted to strangle me when you saw me a few days ago? Imo Wushang's eyelids drooped as a trace of regret flashed across his fair and handsome face. In the end, he didn't say anything more. His speechless appearance deeply pleased her. Shinyueji smiled slightly and tapped her fingers on the table. You men, I can see it very clearly. When you have a plot to make use of someone, you make a solemn pledge of love, sweet words, and deep feelings. I originally thought that the regent would disdain using such means, but I didn't expect that I had overestimated you. Hearing this, Imo Wushang got up from the bed and walked in front of her. Chapter 107. Not now doesn't mean not in the future. Not in the future. Shinyueji sneered. Before I entered the palace, my mother often said that a man can die for you because it is the responsibility of a gentleman. When a man can give up his identity, give up his position, give up his meticulous arrangements, give up everything that is within reach, and be willing to hold hands with you, that is the kind of love that can only be met by chance. The man looked sad but still calm. I can not only die for you, but also give up everything for you. Shinyueji curled her lips. Regent makes it sound nice. When the time comes, I'm afraid it'll be a piece of cake. Shinyueji was speechless. She just wanted to say a few sarcastic words to divert the throbbing in her heart. It was undeniable that no matter what Imo Wushang's intention was, his words still made Shinyueji's heart, which had calmed down with great difficulty, recover uncontrollably again. The man's handsome face inched closer to her, his sexy lips curving into a gentle arc. He put his big hand on the table and circled Shinyueji's whole body in his arms. As long as it is about you, I can do it. Shinyueji blushed again and wanted to push him away. Regent, please behave yourself. I am the emperor's woman. Imo Wushang's black eyes were burning, cold and threatening, with a firm tone. You are me? Shinyueji couldn't bear this cold and hot feeling in a short time. She thought of how he had restrained her and hit her acupoints just now. Shinyueji didn't want to continue this topic with him. She was afraid that if she annoyed him, he would hit her again later. Regent, before you came, you said you were tired. Now that you have rested and your goal has been achieved, can you leave now? Imo Wushang sat next to her, very close. The man's body, in addition to the cold aura, also had a mouth-watering fresh aura. Shinyueji moved the round chair slightly to the side. I am hungry. Her breath was stuck in her throat, and she almost couldn't breathe. Shinyueji glared at the man in front of her, who wanted a foot after taking an inch. She had no choice but to push a plate of pastries in front of her to him. Make do with it. The man glanced at her but did not move. These pastries were served by Double Happiness yesterday. This empress didn't even have the time to eat them because of the matter at Dayang Palace. Seeing Imo Wushang's hand move, he took a piece of pastry and placed it in his mouth. His brows were tightly knitted until the entire pastry entered his mouth. His good-looking brows were tightly knitted together. Shinyueji noticed that something was wrong. She suspiciously took a piece of pastry and put it in her mouth. As soon as she tasted the taste, she immediately retched and vomited. It actually turned sour. Oh no. Seeing Imo Wushang struggling to swallow a piece of pastry, Shinyueji face-bombed. Regent, don't you think the taste of this pastry has changed? Yes. The man grunted indifferently. Then why are you still eating? Hungry. Shun Yueji. Why did she have the illusion that she was abusing a good person? I'll ask Double Happiness to go to the Imperial Kitchen to get you something to eat. Shin Yueji snatched another piece of pastry from his hand. Although the food in this Phoenix Palace is not as good as that in the Regent's residence, this Empress can't let the Regent starve here. After saying that, she was about to call Double Happiness. What are you doing? The man suddenly approached her, his sexy thin lips almost touching her face. Shin Yueji was shocked. Chapter 108. Pa! A loud sound was heard. In the silent hall, this slap was particularly loud, and there was even a response. Shin Yueji's mouth twitched as she trembled her numb hand. Then she looked at the man's handsome and fair face, which was flushed. In his dark eyes, there was an emotion that she couldn't understand. Her heart was beating so fast that it was about to jump out of her throat. Trembling, she touched the conspicuous red half of his face. Regent, are you okay? Her hand was wrapped in his big palm. Imo Wushang's dark eyes were watery, and after a while, he calmed down. In the future, if I do anything wrong, you can treat me like this. Shin Yueji didn't know if he said this out of anger or because he was stunned. Shin Yueji nodded and didn't dare to refute. The man carried her to the Imperial Kitchen and gently put her down. Looking at the kitchen in front of her, Shun Yueji was speechless. He suddenly approached her, and it turned out that he brought her to the Imperial Kitchen. Her hand was still numb, but looking at the man's handsome face, the red mark slowly disappeared. She felt a little guilty. Regent, are you going to find food by yourself? Imo Wushang didn't answer her, but took her hand and walked in. Cook for me. What? Thinking that she had heard wrong, Shin Yueji's small eyes bulged. The man's dark eyes fell on her. Cook something for me. But I don't know how to do it. I never did this when I was in the mansion. The man's beautiful brows twisted into a dead knot, and his handsome face became gloomy in an instant. Realizing that something was wrong, Shin Yueji quickly pulled away from him, far away from him. The day before yesterday, you cooked for him. Shun Yueji. She seriously pondered over his words. Shin Yueji remembered that when she went to the Imperial study to see Feng Juqing a few days ago, she did make a bowl of candy date porridge for him. But at that time, her hands were red and swollen, and she couldn't do it herself, so she specially asked the cook in the Imperial kitchen to help her. Thinking of this, Shin Yueji's eyes became cold. How did you know about this? Are you spying on me? The man's dark eyes flickered. Ignoring her words, he pulled her arm and walked to some ingredients on the table. Cook for me. Looking at him rather speechlessly, Shin Yueji raised her hands and waved her two bruised and muddy claws in front of him. Prince Regent, is the food made by my hands edible? Are you sure you don't mind? Imo Wushang's gaze followed her raised hands. His eyes flickered and he nodded. I don't mind. Shin Yueji, light the fire. She gritted her teeth and spat out two words. He was making things difficult for her in the middle of the night. Shin Yueji glared at him fiercely. She met his puzzled eyes and looked back at him arrogantly. I am responsible for cooking for you. The Prince Regent can't just stand there and do nothing, right? Or did the Regent not know how to light a fire? Do you think burning fire is condescending to you? There was a flash of understanding in Obsidian's eyes. Imo Wushang obediently walked to the stove and lowered his noble body. His figure was tall and straight, and his black robe was outstanding. His peerlessly handsome facial features were unmatched, and his natural temperament was daunting, especially his hands, white and slender, straight like bamboo. He didn't look like a person who had done such a lowly job. Chapter 109. A high and mighty man like Imo Wushang was supposed to live in the sky above the mortal world. The man held the firewood and stared at it for a while. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he looked at Shin Yueji. Shall we burn it now? His brain froze for a moment. Shin Yueji walked quickly to him, touched a handful of ash from the edge of the stove, and smeared some on both sides of his handsome face. On the man's fair face, there were two conspicuous black marks. Looking at the man's puzzled expression, Shin Yueji grinned. Burn it. Imo Wushang obediently lit the fire and threw the firewood into it one by one. Soon, under the light of the fire, the man's handsome face was illuminated. His handsome face was covered with a layer of golden light, dazzling and attractive. Shin Yueji quickly looked away from the man and began to busy herself with the ingredients. Her petite body was busy, and her delicate and beautiful face was full of seriousness. The man was still holding a piece of firewood in his hand, looking at Shin Yueji in a daze, 2 vegetables and 1 soup. Shin Yueji clapped her hands, and her serious face finally relaxed. Done. Then the next step was, Shin Yueji put the prepared ingredients into the pot, sat on a bench at the side, and watched the man burn the fire with a focused expression. 2 smears of black ash were still on his face, but the man didn't dislike them at all, nor did he wipe them off. He had a handsome face, a sharp nose, and thin lips that were hard to describe in the golden light. A pair of black eyes were even more dazzling than rare treasures. Mamily, spare me. Spare me, I won't dare to do it again. Slave. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream came from outside. The man's hand holding the firewood paused, and a murderous look flashed across his handsome face, especially when he felt Shun Yueji look away from him, only to hear a pa-dash sound. The firewood was broken into 2 halves, and before it fell to the ground, wood powder and dust flew everywhere. Why does this sound so familiar? Ignoring Imo Wushang behind her, Shin Yueji frowned and walked out of the imperial kitchen. Not far away, under a big tree, Xiao Zhuozi was tied up and covered in blood. 2 fat eunuchs were on top of him, punching and kicking him. In front of him stood Mammy Li, who had been punished with 50 strokes of the rod yesterday. Looking at her lively appearance, she didn't look like someone who had been flogged before. Not to mention 50 floggings. She probably didn't even get a single one. Shun Yueji's lips curled up into an evil smile as she crossed her arms in front of her chest. She already knew that Xiao Zhuozi would be eliminated by Gu Yuan, but she didn't expect Gu Yuan to act so quickly. Wasn't she afraid that she would order Mammy Li to secretly deal with Xiao Zhuozi just yesterday? By then, it would be obvious that she was the one being suspected. Or, she wanted to take all the credit for this. Plotting to make people think that she was the one who killed Xiao Zhuozi? As if she thought of something, a glint flashed across her eyes. Xiao Zhuozi's clothes were tattered, and there were a few exposed parts of his skin that were so cold that his bones could be seen. Blood stained his eunuch uniform, making the color of his clothes even darker. Chapter 110. Senior Nurse Li sneered and looked down at his pitiful appearance. She saw Xiao Zhuozi crawling towards her pathetically, begging for mercy in a pitiful voice. She stepped on Xiao Zhuozi's hand. His bloody hand was already mottled with blood. Now that Senior Nurse Li stepped on it, Xiao Zhuozi's screams sounded weak, as if he was dead. You traitorous dog. Her Highness treated you well. Yet you colluded with Imperial Consort Shun to harm Her Highness. This servant did not. This servant is telling the truth. Li Xin stomped on the back of his hand several times. It was a heart-wrenching pain. His hand was so painful that it was numb, as if it would fall off his arm at any time. Xiao Zhuozi trembled in pain. This servant is loyal to Her Highness the Empress. I did not. I really did not. Senior Nurse, please investigate. Beat him until he's barely breathing. Then dig a hole and bury him. Let him know the consequences of betraying Her Highness the Empress. Senior Nurse, spare me. Senior Nurse, spare me. Xiao Zhuozi struggled with all his strength. He was injured all over and was no match for the 2 eunuchs. He struggled to catch his breath. The pain all over his body made him wish he was dead. At this moment, Mammy Li's body is really strong. Even after being hit by 50 boards, she is still as if nothing happened. A mocking voice came from behind. Senior Nurse Li, who had been proud of herself, instantly stiffened. Her body stiffened as she slowly turned around. She saw a petite figure walking over under the moonlight. She was dressed in a pink dress and had a beautiful and clean face. Her red lips were curled into a faint smile, and her bright eyes were sparkling in the moonlight. Shun, Imperial Consort Shin. She froze on the spot. The two eunuchs behind saw Shen Yueji and quickly knelt down. Greetings to Imperial Consort Shen. When Xiao Zhuozi saw her, a glimmer of hope appeared in his despairing eyes. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground, unconscious. Shen Yueji shrugged slightly and said, compared with these two eunuchs, Mammy Li is really ignorant. It turns out that you, the maid of the Empress, are more arrogant than me. Mammy Li was shocked. She hurriedly knelt on the ground and bowed respectfully. Greetings, Imperial Concubine. Shen Yueji walked past her and stood in front of Xiao Zhuozi. She looked up and down at the wounds all over his body and sneered. Seniorly, are you trying to coerce and seduce Xiao Zhuozi? Was it your Empress who ordered you to kill him? But Mammy Li's face suddenly turned pale. Without giving her a chance to speak, Shen Yueji opened her lips lightly and said, Does Mammy Li want to say that this matter has nothing to do with your Empress and you made the decision without authorization? In my opinion, Mammy Li is really arrogant. I just realized that this lowly maid, who has been with the master for a long time, can make the decision without authorization and do such a big thing in the Imperial Palace. Li Zhan's face was firm and calm. Imperial Consort, you must be joking. I really dare not make the decision without authorization. I intend to punish Xiao Zhuozi and then confess to the Empress. The Empress has always been merciful. Bang. There was a sound. Mammy Li's whole body flipped backward uncontrollably. She was forced to swallow the words that were on the tip of her tongue. Chapter 111. It was as if a stone was pressing on her chest, making her unable to get up and struggle. She looked at Shen Yueji in horror. Imperial Concubine, what do you mean? Even if I made a mistake, I am also a servant of the Empress. When it comes to punishment, the Empress should be the one to decide, not the Imperial Concubine. The strength under her feet suddenly increased, and Mammy Li suddenly couldn't breathe, and her face was extremely pale. It's true that Mammy Li is a servant of Xianghe Palace, but since yesterday, Xiao Zhuozi has been a servant of our Fengqi Palace. As the saying goes, when you beat a dog, you have to look at its master. In Mammy Li's eyes, do you have any respect for me, the Imperial Concubine? How dare you deal with my people in private? How dare you? Li Zhan put her hands on the ground, and her fingertips were in the mud. She stared at Shen Yueji with a pale face. Xiao Zhuozi is a servant of the Empress Xianghe Palace. If a servant of Xianghe Palace makes a mistake, it is natural for him to be punished by the Xianghe Palace. It has nothing to do with the Imperial Concubine. She let out a scream. Shen Yueji's eyes were full of cold light. If I say he is a servant of Fengqi Palace, then he is a servant of Fengqi Palace. Mammy Li stared at her with a look of anger and fear. Her eyes turned and fell on the two eunuchs kneeling on the ground. The two eunuchs saw her eyes, and they struggled back and forth in torment and fear. They suddenly climbed up from the ground and rushed towards Shen Yueji. Shen Yueji's mouth raised a disdainful sneer, and she didn't move. Swish! A cold light flashed. In the silent night, the cold wind rustled, and the sound of bones breaking made people's scalp numb. The two eunuchs were still a step away from Shen Yueji, and their bodies fell straight to the ground. The blood gushing from their waists was dazzling, and soon the ground was wet with blood. Mammy Li's eyes widened in horror. The two eunuchs were cut into 4 pieces, but they still had some consciousness. They struggled on the ground with their hands, and their oily faces slowly became purple and bloodless. Mammy Li realized the horror, especially when she saw the man behind Shen Yueji. The man was dressed in a black robe. His figure was tall and straight, and his handsome face made people feel cold. He came under the moonlight. The cold moonlight shone on his handsome face, especially on his face that was hard to describe. There were even 2 gray scars on his face. However, this did not make him look like he was in a sorry state. Instead, it made him look like a Rakshasa that came from the netherworld. It was frightening, dangerous, and terrifying. Mammy Li swallowed hard. At this moment, she couldn't even speak clearly. Prince Regent. Why was he here? Why was he with Shen Yueji? The Prince Regent and I saw that the moonlight was so bright that we were having a rendezvous here. But Mammy Li, you disturbed the mood of the Prince Regent and me. Don't you think it's annoying? Xin Yueji smiled and withdrew her foot from Li Zhen's chest. As soon as she withdrew her foot, Mammy Li immediately lay on the ground and breathed the fresh air awkwardly. Walking to the man, Xin Yueji wrapped her hands around the man's slender and strong arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. The Prince Regent doesn't like to be disturbed. Mammy Li, for the sake of the Empress sister, I really don't want to argue with you, and I also want to let you go. But the Prince Regent... Chapter 112. Mammy Li was so scared that she couldn't speak. If it was said that she was afraid of Xin Yueji with disdain, but she was really afraid of Imo Wushang. That kind of fear came from the inside. Even her hair, every part of her was full of fear for him. She was motionless, as if she was nailed to the same place. Her whole body was cold, as if cold water had been poured over her. Even so, Mammy Li still clenched her teeth, and her voice trembled. She still pretended to be calm. She smiled coldly and looked at Xin Yueji, imperial concubine. You are really shameless. Everyone in the capital knows that the regent hates you. It is you who has been pestering the regent. How could a person of the Prince Regent's status be with someone like you? Swoosh! A cold light flashed in front of her eyes. Xin Yueji didn't have time to see it clearly. Mammy Li only felt that the cold light was coming to her. It was so fast that she thought she was dazzled. When she felt a bone-piercing pain in her left arm, she let out a blood-curdling scream. He clutched his left arm that had fallen to the ground. His empty left arm was filled with fresh blood that was gushing out of it. Her face was as white as a sheet of paper. She covered her broken arm and shivered in the night. The soil under her body was dyed red by her blood. She looked at Imo Wushang in horror. He was so handsome and noble that no one dared to look at him. Regent, I dare to ask what I did wrong. Her lips trembled, and the corners of her lips were bleeding because of the pain. Imo Wushang's cold eyes swept over her face. He grabbed Xin Yueji into his arms and held her tightly. Leng Zhao's voice was filled with love. How do you want her to die? Mammy Li is the most trusted maid of the Empress. The Empress doesn't know about you, Xiao. Now Mammy Li is involved. I'm afraid that the Empress will suspect me. What can I do? She pretended to be in a dilemma, which made the man look very cute. He raised his eyebrows. Put it on me. Xin Yueji grinned and said, then send Mammy Li to the two-headed monster. Let them drink the blood of those young and beautiful palace maids. Let them taste the blood of this old thing and see how it tastes. You Xiao. Mammy Li struggled to get up from the ground and murmured, what did you do to Yu Xiao? Imperial concubine Shun. How dare you? You'll know soon enough. You won't have a good ending for going against the Gu family. Shun Yueji, if you dare to touch me and the Empress finds out, she definitely won't let you off lightly. Xin Yueji patted off the dust on her hands and glanced at her lightly. Her voice was full of sarcasm. Are your ears not working well now that you're old? I did not interfere in this matter. The person who touched you was the Prince Regent. If your Gu family is really capable and doesn't fear the Prince Regent, you can come and find the Prince Regent to punish you. However, she deliberately kept them in suspense. It depends on whether your Gu family is willing to offend the Regent because of an insignificant maid. Ji Chu. Yes, master. Ji Chu stepped forward and picked Mammy Li up from the ground as if she was a dead person. Chapter 113. The two eunuchs' corpses and the bloodstains on the ground were also cleaned up by the men in black in the blink of an eye. The night returned to its previous tranquility. The strong smell of blood dissipated, and the cold moonlight shone on people's bodies, which seemed particularly warm. Xin Yueji frowned as she looked at the soil that had been refurbished on the ground. She frowned again and again. Suddenly, she raised her head. She met Imo Wushang's puzzled eyes. Oh no, the food is going to be burnt. She quickly pushed the man away and ran to the imperial kitchen. Before entering, a pungent smell came from inside, causing her to cover her nose. A cloud of green smoke came out from inside. Fortunately, it was only the food that was burnt, and it had not reached the point of a fire in the imperial kitchen. She wiped away the cold sweat on her forehead. If this meal really burned down the imperial kitchen, it would really be her fault. Imo Wushang followed behind her, and his unkind eyes looked at the green smoke from inside. In the green smoke, the little woman ran to the stove, and a smell of burnt spread from the pot. His handsome face was gloomy. Shin Yueji lifted the lid of the pot. The porridge was burnt and stuck to the pot, mixed with the black pot ash and burnt smell. No matter how she looked at it, she had no appetite. When she looked up, she saw the man's unhappy face. Shin Yueji withdrew her hand bitterly. Well, I forgot the time when I was outside, and forgot that there was still something cooking in the pot. But you, too, who allowed you to go out? Stay here and guard the fire, so that it won't be burnt. Seeing that she attributed the problem to him in a few words, Imo Wushang's handsome face moved slightly, and his expression seemed a little wronged. He walked to her without saying a word, looked down at the mess in the pot. Shin Yueji felt distressed when she saw this. After all, he had helped her just now, and he was so cooperative. She patted the man's shoulder comfortingly. It's okay, just make do with it. She found a bowl and scooped out the top layer of porridge with a spoon. She handed it to him. Imo Wushang's dark eyes looked at the bowl, which was also black, and he could not see the ingredients of the porridge. Apart from the steam, it could be said that there was nothing to see at all. Shin Yueji filled 2 bowls of porridge and brought out the 2 plates of side dishes. Fortunately, the dishes were not burnt. Thus, just like that, the 2 of them carried the burnt porridge and 2 plates of side dishes up to the roof of the imperial kitchen. Under the moonlight, they began to eat. The burnt porridge was indeed not tasty, and the side dishes that were stained with the burnt smell were also very weird. Shin Yueji ate a few mouthfuls and couldn't eat anymore. She turned to look at the man, only to find that his movements were elegant. Even when he was eating, he didn't frown. His expression seemed to be more appetizing than when he was eating. Dumbfounded, she picked up a piece of black food with her chopsticks and put it into the man's bowl. However, the man's obsidian eyes flashed with light. He put the dish she picked up into his mouth and chewed slowly with a happy expression. Shin Yueji, somewhat flattered, she looked at the man. This food, is it really so delicious? Doesn't the Prince Regent feel that something is wrong? The man's thin lips moved, his brows raised as he looked at her with his dark eyes. Delicious. And then, Shin Yueji simply put down the bowl and chopsticks, watching the man eat the burnt food clean. Chapter 114. Closing her surprised jaw, Shin Yueji patted the man's shoulder with a distressed look. These days, I've really wronged you. Now you don't even have a sense of taste. Don't worry, the next time you come, I will cook a few delicious dishes for you. Looking at the red and swollen little hand on his shoulder, Imo Wushang moved his lips. He wrapped her little hand in his palm. Maybe it was because she had been sitting outside for too long. Her little hand was a little cold. He took off his black robe, intending to put it on her. Unexpectedly, Shin Yueji immediately waved her hand and refused. Don't, Prince Regent. Your clothes are too cold. I will freeze to death if you put it on me. The man's dark eyes were as deep as the night. He no longer cared about the clothes on his body, but turned to hold her in his arms. He thought that Shin Yueji would shiver because of the cold breath on his body. Unexpectedly, the man's body was exceptionally warm. Imo Wushang held her carefully in his arms and rubbed her restless little head with his smooth chin. My body is not cold. The dense night gradually dissipated, and there was slowly some light in the dark night. It was almost dawn. Shin Yueji nestled in the man's arms, staring at the rising sun. Imo Wushang, tell me honestly, do you like to compete with the Emperor for women? The man's hand on her waist tightened again and again. His Adam's apple moved and his face darkened. I don't like to compete with him. I only like you. Then first, when the words were on the tip of her mouth, Shin Yueji simply shut her mouth and stopped talking. She stayed in the man's arms for a while. After Mammy Li dies, let Ji Chu throw her body to Shangha Palace. Yes, little Zhuozi is not easy to see now. I am not familiar with this palace and don't know who can be trusted. I dare not hide little Zhuozi rashly. Let Ji Chu find a place where no one is around to settle down first. After a few days, I will ask the Emperor for him. After all, he has helped me. If I let him return to Shanghe Palace, it is undoubtedly pushing him into the fire pit. Okay. The man unconditionally obeyed her words. Shun Yueji immediately beamed with joy. For the first time in her life, she realized that the feeling of a man doting on her, caring for her, and protecting her was so good. Compared to Feng Juqing, this was the first time in so many years that she had experienced such a feeling from a man. For some inexplicable reason, she felt like she had someone to rely on. It's getting late. I should go back. Oh, right. Do you still plan to let Ji Chu and the others drain South Lake's water? Imo Wushang's good-looking eyes fell on her body. He stared at her delicate little face for a while and said, Gu will listen to you. Looking at the beautiful face in front of her, Shun Yueji's eyes were filled with excitement. Really? The man's dark eyes softened as he nodded. N. Shun Yueji's long eyelashes fluttered a few times. Compared to draining the water of South Lake, I think it's better for the regent to boil some water in South Lake. I think it's... Taking a deep breath, Shun Yueji glared at him fiercely and covered her waist. What are you doing? Damn. Why did you pinch me? Imo Wushang's handsome face, which was originally filled with tenderness, instantly darkened. He glanced coldly at Shun Yueji. Chapter 115. Later, Imo Wushang sent her back to Fengqi Palace. On the way back, he didn't even look at her, let alone talk to her. Shun Yueji didn't know what she had done wrong. Imo Wushang, who was silent and cold, looked really scary. She tried to talk to him. Well, actually, I did this for the sake of the late Empress. You know, after the late Empress died, she was so lonely down there. I just wanted to find a few more handsome men to talk to her. Actually, you don't have to stare at me with such a fierce look. Well, under the man's dangerous gaze, Shun Yueji obediently shut up. Your Highness, how did you offend the regent? When I saw him leave, his eyes were full of fire, and he looked scarier than usual. After Imo Wushang left, Double Happiness came in, trembling with fear. Shun Yueji took a sip of tea to soothe her throat. Nothing much, just talking about the late Empress. Oh. Double Happiness's face showed a look of understanding, as if she understood. By the way, as if thinking of something, Shun Yueji put down the teacup in her hand. Didn't you say that Big Brother could send Li Yao's 3 daughters to the palace yesterday? It's been a day. Why haven't they arrived yet? Your Highness, don't mention it. That Li Yingying is really a concubine's daughter, timid and inexperienced. On the way back to the capital, she fainted 3 times. Young Master has been busy looking for a doctor for her, and was delayed for 2 days on the way. Really? Shun Yueji slightly moved her eyebrows, turning the teacup on the table. In my impression, Li Yingying shouldn't be such a coward, right? She could survive being bullied by a group of sisters until now, so she shouldn't be so cowardly. These days, have you found any quick-witted eunuchs and maids in our palace? Double Happiness seriously thought for a moment. These maids and eunuchs are usually busy cleaning Fengqi Palace, trembling with fear. I really haven't seen any little eunuchs or maids who are smart enough. Speaking of this, Double Happiness's eyes lit up. Oh, yes, there is one. Shun Yueji looked at her. Call him here. Shock appeared in Shuangxi's eyes. Your Highness wants to see him? Seeing her like this, Shun Yueji raised her eyebrows. What's wrong? That little eunuch's face is ugly and half of his face is scarred. There's a big red mark on his face, and it looks quite scary. This servant is afraid that her ladyship will be scared if she sees him. However, he is quite quick-witted. The last time this servant almost fell, he was the one who caught the plate in my hand. Oh? Shun Yueji's hand that was twirling the teacup paused. Call him over, and let me have a look. Yes, Your Highness. Not long after, Double Happiness led a skinny little eunuch into the room. The little eunuch's head was lowered, and his face could not be seen clearly. His thin and weak body, in Shun Yueji's eyes, was thinner than any of the little eunuchs in the palace. Even Xiao Zhuozi's thin and weak body could not compare to him. Servant Huayang greets the imperial consort. Huayang. The little eunuch's name piqued Shun Yueji's interest. Her lips curled into a faint smile. It's rare for those lowly servants in the palace to have this kind of name. Most of them had names like Xiaozhuazi or Xiaolizi. Double Happiness laughed at the side. That's why this servant feels that he's quite special, Your Highness. Chapter 116. Her gaze fell on him for a moment. Raise your head and let Ben Gong see. Huayang obediently raised his head. Just as Shuangshi had described, half of his face was ugly. Red marks covered half of his cheeks, ugly and frightening. But the other face was white and smooth, like fine silk. He was born with a pair of extremely beautiful eyes, bright and resplendent, clear and clean. For a moment, Shun Yueji was stunned. Apart from the ugly half of his face, a man like this was undoubtedly outstanding. How did he enter the palace to become a eunuch? When did you enter the palace? Your Highness, this servant has been in the palace for less than a year. Less than a year, and you were sent to Phoenix Perch Palace. Is there any powerful eunuch in the palace that you rely on? Huayang probably didn't expect her to speak so bluntly. He paused and replied respectfully, previously, Xianghe Palace's eunuch Tang. When he mentioned eunuch Tang, his pair of clear and clean eyes suddenly became incomparably cold. A cold aura emanated from his body. Xianghe Palace's eunuch Tang had helped this servant a lot. Xianghe Palace? You used to be a servant of Xianghe Palace? Hearing Xianghe Palace, Shuangshi's expression turned ugly. If she had known that he used to be a servant of Xianghe Palace, she wouldn't have mentioned him in front of the Empress. Your Highness, Huayang is a servant of Xianghe Palace. You can't put him in an important position. Walking in front of Shun Yueji, Shuangshi lowered her head and whispered in her ear. Huayang's kneeling body was as straight as a pine tree, neither servile nor overbearing. Even his gaze towards her was full of stubbornness. She didn't see the fear and trepidation that a servant would have when he saw his master. Shun Yueji slightly straightened her body, her hand on the armrest of the chaise longue, tapping it lightly. I've heard of Tang Kai. I heard that he has quite a bit of power in Xianghe Palace. Since you've received his help before, you should also be a servant of Xianghe Palace. The Empress doted on the 6 palaces. Any servant of Xianghe Palace would have a limitless future. To put it bluntly, being able to be a servant of Auspicious Harmony Palace was a treatment that was comparable to being an unfavored concubine in the harem. Huayang's hands, which were hanging by his sides, suddenly clenched very tightly, and many green veins appeared on the back of his hands. The man's dark eyes were no longer as clear and clean as before. Instead, they were filled with impurities, pitch black and turbid. Shun Yueji looked interested. What did Tang Kai do to you? This Empress doesn't care who you used to work for. This Empress only knows that since you're serving in this Empress Phoenix Perch Palace, then you're my Phoenix Perch Palace's servant. This Empress needs to know everything that happened to you in the palace this past year. Otherwise, this Empress will not be able to put someone in an important position, someone whose background I don't even know. The word important struck Huayang's heart heavily. He suddenly raised his head. His eyes were filled with a dense light as he stared straight at Shun Yueji. How dare you? The imperial consort is not someone you can look at directly. Double Happiness scolded in a low voice. Huayang reacted. He quickly lowered his gaze and knelt on the ground. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Your servant. Tell me, what did Tang Kai do to you? And how did you get arranged to serve in this Phoenix Perch Palace? The man's eyes narrowed, and a dark shadow flashed past the depths of his eyes. The back of his hands were tightly clenched. Chapter 117. Sure enough, after the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, Huayang opened his mouth in a hoarse voice. Eunuch Tang is good with words. He can make the eunuchs and nannies who are above him in the palace happy every time. Even Yu Xiao and Mammy Li, who serve the Empress, value Eunuch Tang. In Xianghe Palace, except for the Empress and some of her maids, Eunuch Tang is half a master. All the servants in Xianghe Palace don't dare to offend him, and he, speaking of something shameful, Huayang gritted his teeth and said, Eunuch Tang has coveted almost all the pretty maids and eunuchs in Xianghe Palace. Most of them have been. His voice gradually trembled, and he couldn't even speak clearly. But Double Happiness and Shun Yueji understood what he was trying to say. Shin Yueji raised her eyebrows. She didn't expect that there would be an unexpected gain. When I first entered the palace, I was chosen by Eunuch Tang because I was prettier than the other eunuchs. I followed Eunuch Tang and tried my best. Later, I found out that Eunuch Tang didn't really want to help me. He just liked my face. After the death of the former emperor, the new emperor ascended the throne. The emperor was kind, so most of the maids and eunuchs in the harem stayed and continued to work in the palace. This Eunuch Tang has been in the palace for decades, and his status in the harem is not something that anyone can afford to offend. Later, after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was arranged to work in Xianghe Palace. This is enough to show how much importance the emperor places on him. Shin Yueji stroked her temples. Go on. After that, Eunuch Tang said that he had something for me to do, so he asked me to wait for him at his place. In the end, when I went there, Eunuch Tang lit his room with incense that could make people fall in love. I realized that something was wrong and wanted to escape. Hua Yang's voice became more and more trembling. I struggled desperately and finally pushed Eunuch Tang away and ran out. But because of that, I hurt Eunuch Tang. So, this face of yours was made by him? Yes. Hua Yang gritted his teeth. At that time, there were a few eunuchs who were on good terms with this servant. All of them were violated by him. Some of them refused to obey and were stripped naked by him. Then, they were nailed to their beds. Some time had passed since then, but every time Hua Yang thought about it, the scene in front of him would still appear in his mind, and he wouldn't be able to sleep well. He would tie those who disobeyed him to the bed and torture them to death. He would make them kneel by the side and watch, not even allowed to blink. Because I rejected him, he used a branding iron to burn my face. Half of my skin was peeled off by him. Hua Yang's voice trembled violently. That kind of despair, helplessness, and heart-wrenching pain were things that he could clearly feel even now. A life worse than death. Eunuch Tang has a secret room in his residence. It's filled with his torture tools and piles of bones. There are also many half-dead people tied up there. He would enter the secret room every night to humiliate them. Chapter 118. They had thought of telling the emperor that the emperor would come to the empress's Xianghe palace every night, but even the empress wanted to help Tang Kai hide it. Every time a eunuch brought it up, the empress would find a topic to avoid it. The emperor had always doted on the empress the most. No matter what the empress said, he never questioned it. Slowly, they understood that their efforts were futile and that they could only be trampled on. Hua Yang didn't know why he was so talkative today. In front of the imperial concubine, he actually said all the words that he had suppressed in his heart for so long without changing a word. It was as if the knot in his heart had been opened up and he had someone to talk to. Later, when I hurt my face, Eunuch Tang lost his patience with me. When the imperial concubine entered the palace, he saw that I was an eyesore, so he arranged for me to come to Fengqi Palace. Shin Yueji couldn't help but chuckle when she heard this. This Eunuch Tang is so arrogant. He casually tossed a servant that he didn't want from Auspicious Harmony Palace to my Phoenix Perch Palace. So it turns out that in his eyes, I'm so insignificant. Double Happiness's face was filled with righteous indignation. This Tang Kai is so daring. He actually dared to do such a thing in the palace. Your Highness, should we tell this to the emperor? Shin Yueji raised her hand. Seeing this, Double Happiness immediately shut up. Hua Yang's eyes had been shining, but when he saw Shin Yueji's gesture, his eyes dimmed. That's right. The person who was favored by the 6 palaces was the empress. Even the empress intentionally concealed the truth for Tang Kai. In the inner palace, who dared to seek their own death and find trouble with Tang Kai? Everyone was probably clenching their teeth, afraid that this matter would be related to them and they would lose their lives. You sound so moved, but how can this empress believe your one-sided words? Hua Yang knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily. What I said is true. If there is any falsehood in my words, may I be struck by lightning. Shin Yueji smiled faintly and looked at him. Moreover, I can't interfere with the matters of your Xianghe palace. I can't offend the empress for a little eunuch like you. What do you think? Hua Yang's face was as white as paper. Despite the disappointment in his heart, he still nodded. Gui Fei is right. However, I am not such a cold-hearted person. Hua Yang's gloomy eyes gradually lit up with hope. Originally, I had asked Double Happiness to call you over because I had something else to tell you to do, but I didn't expect you to have such an unbearable experience. Hua Yang, this consort doesn't know much about you. As for your words or your loyalty, this consort can't be certain. If Imperial Consort can help this servant redress the injustice today and take revenge for those who died, this servant is willing to serve Imperial Consort faithfully and will not dare to have any other thoughts. Helping you is just to let you meet His Majesty and tell him the whole story. When the time comes, His Majesty will personally make the decision. However, the Emperor had always been protective of the Empress. Last time, Bin Gong and the Empress had even had a bad misunderstanding. In the end, the Emperor had sided with the Empress and felt that the Empress was the victim. If Bin Gong helped you, it would be clearly making trouble for the Empress in front of His Majesty. At that time, not only would the Empress hate Bin Gong, even His Majesty would not like to see Bin Gong. This servant will listen to Imperial Consort. Whatever Imperial Consort wants this servant to do, this servant will do. Chapter 119. Walking up to him, Shen Yueji whispered a few words in his ear. Hua Yang's expression changed again and finally calmed down.
Yes.
Your Highness, can this servant from Auspicious Harmony Palace be trusted? He's Gu Yuan's man. What if he's a spy Gu Yuan arranged in our Phoenix Perch Palace? I didn't say much to him. I just said that there's someone familiar in Diaoyang Palace and told him to inform Gu Yuan. Even if Gu Yuan knows that I ordered Hua Yang to inform her, she can't say anything. Even so, Double Happiness still looked hesitant. That's too risky. I'm afraid that Hua Yang really is the Empress man, and when he finds out that your Highness is behind this, he'll turn around and harm you. Do you think he's done anything that's not beneficial to me? Shen Yueji pursed her lips and smiled. Besides, what's there to be afraid of? Don't we still have the regent? Hearing this, Shuangshi's worry turned into joy. Yes, your ladyship is currently protected by the regent, and with our Shen family, even if the Empress wanted to harm your ladyship, she would have to weigh her own weight. Just one Shen family is not something that she could easily touch, not to mention that behind your ladyship, there is still the regent supporting her. Auspicious Harmony Palace, what did you say? With this shout, the tea set on the table was smashed down by a pair of delicate hands. In a split second, the sound of crackling echoed throughout the hall. Your Highness, calm down. Your Highness, calm down. The servants of Auspicious Harmony Palace knelt on the ground. All of them were trembling with fear. Yes, this servant saw it with my own eyes. When this servant passed by Diaoyang Palace, I saw Miss Yuxiu. Miss Yuxiu, Yuxiu had disappeared last night and had yet to return. Gu Yuan was suspicious and ordered people to look for her in secret, but there was no news. The first person she suspected was Shen Yueji. When she ordered her spies to investigate Diaoyang Palace, she received news that the Emperor was staying at Diaoyang Palace. She secretly clenched her fists. Since the Emperor was with her, Shen Yueji didn't need to do anything to get rid of Yuxiu. However, she was shocked in her heart when she heard the 3 words Mink Sun Palace, and she had a bad premonition. She suppressed the uneasiness in her heart. Her pair of gentle eyes were now ferocious and sinister. Coupled with her ugly face under the veil, it was even more terrifying. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and head to Diaoyang Palace. Bring Yuxiu back. Yes. After she finished speaking, she shot a cold glare at Hua Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. If you dare to lie, this Empress will definitely remove your head. This servant's words are absolutely true. This servant saw it with his own eyes. I definitely wouldn't dare to lie. In less than an hour, Yuxiu's body was carried back by 2 eunuchs wrapped in white silk. Gu Yuan sat on the phoenix throne. After they left, she couldn't calm down. Yuxiu suddenly disappeared, and even Mammy Li's whereabouts were unknown. She had sent her out last night to get rid of Xiao Zhuozi, but she had yet to return. Now that the white silk was pulled apart, Yushio's face was purple and bloodless. Her entire body was like a piece of white paper, and no flesh could be seen. She stared in shock and fear. Her mouth was wide open, and there was no tongue in it. There were 2 sharp marks on her purple neck, as if she had been strangled to death with sharp nails. Chapter 120. The next moment. Your Highness, bad news. Your Highness, Mammy Lee. A sharp voice mixed with terror came from outside the hall. Gu Yuan looked over and saw a panic-stricken young eunuch tumbling and crawling on the ground, his face as white as a sheet of paper from fright. Your Highness, Mammy Lee. Mammy Lee. Gu Yuan clenched her teeth and tried to calm her trembling heart. She pretended to be calm and said, "What happened to Mammy Lee?" Mammy Lee. Mammy Lee is dead. What? Gu Yuan widened her eyes and her face was full of disbelief. 2 eunuchs carried Mammy Lee's body in from outside. There were 2 sharp strangulation marks on Yushio's neck, and there was a deep wound on Mammy Lee's neck. Blood diffused from the wound and solidified on her neck. Her torso inside seemed to be completely hollowed out, and it was all supported by her bones and unknown things. But what scared Gu Yuan the most was her face, which was studded with nails. There were 9 thick nails. Every part of her face, every corner, looked exactly like Gu Yuan at that time. Her scalp was numb. She staggered to sit on the phoenix chair and almost fell down. Fortunately, the maid beside her held her in time. She looked at the maid with trembling and tearful eyes. Her vision blurred, and all of a sudden, a face that she couldn't be more familiar with appeared in front of her eyes. It was a terrifying face that was full of rough nails. "Ah!" she screamed and pushed the maidservant away. "Get lost. Get out of here. Get out of here." Your Highness, what's wrong with you?" The maid who was pushed away looked scared and puzzled. "She's back. She must be back," Gu Yuan murmured in a daze. Her almond-shaped eyes were full of tears. "I want to see the Emperor. I want to see the Emperor." "Your Highness, the Emperor is discussing with the ministers in the Imperial kitchen. I don't care. I don't care. I want to see the Emperor. Go quickly. Go to the Imperial study room. Go now." After Gu Yuan finished speaking emotionally, she felt her vision darken and her powerless body fell straight to the ground. "Your Highness, what's wrong with you? Your Highness, wake up." For a moment, the servants of Auspicious Harmony Palace were in chaos. Many panic shouts could be heard. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and inform His Majesty in the Imperial study. Quickly summon the Imperial physician. Summon the Imperial physician. If anything happens to Her Majesty, be careful of your heads." Hua Yang looked at the scene in front of him coldly. The servants of Shanghe Palace were in a flurry. Without the support of Yushio and Mammy Lee, they didn't know what to do. While no one was paying attention, he quietly retreated. After returning to Phoenix Perch Palace, he told Xinyueji everything he had seen in Auspicious Harmony Palace, including how Gu Yuan had fainted from fright. Double Happiness listened with great interest. In the end, she didn't forget to pour a cup of tea for Xinyueji. She even poured a cup of tea for Hua Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. Taking a sip of tea, Xinyueji looked doubtful. "I didn't expect the death of Yushio and Mammy Lee to have such a big impact on Sister Empress." Chapter 121. Xinyueji gently knocked on the table and glanced at him. Seeing this, Hua Yang immediately shut his mouth. "Since you are now my servant in Fengqi Palace, you should remember what you should say and what you shouldn't say. The late Empress has been dead for several months, and the Emperor is a wise monarch. How can he believe these so-called ghosts and gods? If you continue spouting nonsense, even I won't be able to protect you if someone with ulterior motives hears you." "Yes, I will obey your Highness's words." "All right, Shuangxi." "Yes, your Highness. Prepare a few things. Later, accompany me to Xianghe Palace to visit Her Majesty the Empress." "Yes, your Highness." Shuangxi responded respectfully and went to prepare. Xinyueji glanced at Hua Yang, who was kneeling on the ground. "The rest is up to you. Consider it my reward for you." As for whether the emperor will believe your words and punish you because of a moment of anger, it's all up to you. Thank you, Your Highness. I understand. When Shun Yueji arrived at Xianghe Palace, she found that the outside of Xianghe Palace was surrounded by colorful concubines. She had never had a good look at Feng Juqing's harem, whether it was when she was alive or now. She only knew that any beauty in the harem was a beauty that could topple a city or country. Every move of the beauty was breathtakingly beautiful. When the concubines saw her coming, there were disdain and flattery on their faces. No matter if they were disdain or flattery, when they saw her approaching, they all saluted. Greetings, Sister Imperial Concubine. Greetings, Sister Imperial Concubine. Shun Yueji stopped in front of them, and her bright eyes quickly swept over them. All my sisters are here. We really have a deep sisterhood. As soon as I heard that Sister Imperial Concubine was sick, we all came to see her. But why are you all standing outside? Sister Imperial Concubine, you don't know. It's the Emperor who doesn't allow us to go in. Oh, I heard that Her Highness fainted because of the late Emperor, and before I came here, I also heard that Mammy Li, the trusted maid of the Empress, had her face covered with 9 thick nails before she died. Rumor has it that when the late Empress died, her face had the same 9 nails. Shun Yueji glanced at the concubine who spoke. She wore a long green dress, and her face was slightly powdered. She was beautiful and refined, her small face exquisite, and her figure exquisite. His lips curled up slightly. Which younger sister are you? The former empress only said that she was drowned in the lake, but Ben Gong did not know when her face was covered with thick nails. You can't just say things like that. It's true. There are very few people who know this. I am one of them, but I was not sure until Mammy Li died and the empress fainted in shock. Then I was sure. When the concubines heard this, they all sighed and fell silent. Shun Yueji's small face was cold, and no one could tell whether she was happy or angry. However, the concubine didn't know how to read people's expressions. She continued to say, I have long heard that the late empress was not favored when she was in the Gu family. She was bullied every day, and the Gu family raised her like a dog. And the empress never treated the late empress as her own sister. Now, the empress was so scared just because of Mammy Li. It was clear that she had a guilty conscience. Maybe the late empress's death was. Shun Yueji scolded in a low voice. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.